Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hi, Susan.
Hello, Guthrie.
And today we have a very special guest, Pamela Pavliscak, founder of Change Science and Sounding Box, and faculty at the Pratt Institute of Information, I believe, in New York City. Did I get that right?
Pratt Institute School of Information, and it's based in New York City. That's right.
Cool. Well, hello, Pamela, sorry. I looked at the last name.
Oh, Pavliscak, and
Yes.
you turned that into Paula.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. We'll forgive you. Or I don't know. I'll forgive you.
That's
So,
it. Interview over.
Yeah, we're done. Thanks for joining us. I have. There's so much stuff. When I was thinking about before we started the call, I was thinking, wow, there's just so many things I want to ask. I don't even know where to start, because I think we share a number of different interests in common. I know that you speak on the relationship that people have to technology, especially in regards to, emotional relationships with technology, which is something I'm really, really interested in as well. So maybe, but why don't we start with what things are you most interested in or excited about or pondering about these days in terms of people and technology? Like what's kind of, rolling around in your brain and you're wondering where we're headed or how to think about it?
Yeah, well, I think I'm obsessed with this idea of our emotional life. So the more we think about the future of ourselves and the future of humans with regard to artificial intelligence and just kind of the scope of technologies that are out there, I think what we're seeing is a lot of fear, almost to the point where I wonder if artificial intelligence and the mere mention of it is like setting off mental health issues, all over the place. And so I'm really interested on exploring that kind of effect that technology has, not so much on the outside world as much as it has on our psyche and our inner world and that kind of emotional layer that we feel. And that combines with this movement that's happening in the study of emotion that's so fascinating right now, is that, there's so many competing theories. I mean, William James asked in, 1884, what is an emotion? And we still don't really have an answer to that, or we have many, many different answers to that. And so I think, the rise of AI and technology that intersects with emotion in a lot of different ways, with this kind of burgeoning interest, scholarship, investigation of emotion, that is what is really fascinating to me. And of course, I'm a design researcher, so my quest for the past 15 years has been investigating our relationship with technology in all kinds of different ways. And it's always struck me as very funny because I'll have lots of projects that our focus is definitely not emotion. And yet everywhere I look, there it is, just below the surface. And so all this kind of comes together in, a lot of different directions for me, but that's sort of the core of my interest and questioning right now.
Yeah, I mean, do you have a background in psychology? Where did the interest in emotion come from?
Well, it rose up sort of gradually. I mean, I'm one of these people, and I guess there's a lot of us working in technology who, I started in the 90s. So of course like a lot of people, I didn't have a background in technology at all. I just got really interested in it. I was studying, literature and cultural studies and doing my best to do the slacker lifestyle and live abroad as much as I could. I lived in Prague for a while, spent a lot of time in Russia and all over Europe. And then when I came back and actually had to settle down to doing something, I studied at the School of Information at University of Michigan, and it was one of the early years of their program that offered a track in human computer interaction. And so that's where the cultural studies and the psychology and technology sort of all intersected.
That's where we grabbed you.
Yep.
So, this whole thing about emotions, and I have a PhD in psychology, but it amazes me how much actual, like, official academic training you can get in psychology and not even, spend any time with emotion, especially at the graduate level. I mean, it's just like absent,
Yeah.
And I think even sometimes at the undergraduate level, it's almost like, talking about emotions, it's considered very unscientific. And it's just one of those things that people feel, and it's very subjective, and it's not that important from a behavioral science research point of view.
Do you think that's because it's hard to measure? It's like, oh, brainwaves, we can measure that, so it's important, and so you can't really measure emotional responses easily.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think what's happening now and what's sort of given an urgency to what I'm writing and what I'm speaking about is this nascent technology called emotion AI, or artificial emotional intelligence, that takes a theory about emotion grounded in evolutionary psychology and applies it to detecting emotion through a lot of different channels, like facial coding, like other signals like gaze or pulse, tone of voice. Obviously, Facebook and now Instagram are doing this through reactions and kind of distilling our emotional life into just a few categories. And, that's not, I mean, a lot of people have fears about that. It's pretty easy to go dark with this kind of technology. It definitely puts it on the map for all of us in a way that, we need to start thinking about, because it's going to be embedded into all of our technology. So if we're working in the design field, I think that it's on us to really get up to speed with a lot of this stuff. But I think there's, some, in addition to kind of this compressing impulse of our emotion, so it can be decoded for, whatever the corporation needs to sell or to get engagement or whatever. There's this other side of it that, we need to be aware of, and how that, at once reflects how we try to detect emotion in each other face to face. I mean, we make those kind of judgments all the time based on facial expression or tone of voice or gesture, what we think people are feeling. But then we also have other ways of knowing emotion, and admit to ourselves that there are a lot of ways we aren't ever going to understand other people's emotional lives, because it has this whole like personal history and cultural background and social layer to it.
So I just want to break this down so our listeners can understand and make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, which I think I am, but I don't want to give myself too much credit. So right now, if we go into like the medical context, there are ways, for example, that you can give AI / deep learning, that kind of neural network software. You give them a lot of data on, say, like EKGs, right? So like how the heart is beating, and you combine that with like an MRI, right? And you give that to the AI, and you say, hey, predict when this person is having some sort of heart problem, and it looks at it, and with over time, it can find the little patterns, the little nuances, the little flutter here combined with the weird little shape here. It like pieces that all together, and it can accurately predict, usually as well as, or now a little better than the best a doctor, maybe not the best doctors, but many doctors can predict, if someone's going to have a heart event. Okay, so that's sort of there's a way that you can use deep learning neural networks, AI, to make predictions about what is going on.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy.
And so you can do that with emotion, right? So you feed all the different stuff, the little twitch of the muscles, the intonation in voice. And if you just give it enough data, it can accurately predict this person is feeling, it's like 72% anger. Like, what exactly?
Except that in real life, we don't feel 72% anger or 14%.
72% anger and 30%
quizzical.
I'm detecting a little flavor of disgruntled something.
Are you detecting an emotion?
But certainly, yeah, but certainly there's like you can be twice as, I feel like there's like different levels of anger and different, and there's like anger mixed with sadness. And
Absolutely.
Like
well, so I think this is, you've hit on a really good analogy. I think that machines will be really good at certain aspects of emotion and helping us maybe to even understand each other and understand our own emotions a little better, or some aspects of those. I think other aspects are, going to still remain opaque. We all have personal histories that shape our concept of an emotion. We have a different emotional range on a personal level. Cultures have, different expressions of emotion, different words for emotion, and the words you use matter to how you feel them. And it will not be easy for machines to pick up on that at first, maybe not ever, but I think there's a lot that we can learn from that. I think there's a lot of potential positive use for that, as long as the goal is, kept to this kind of, broader goal of really adding and extending and augmenting our emotional lives, as technology has always done. I mean, that's, people are fearful of it, but I also think that's something that's always happened with technology, that, we design technology, but then technology comes right back and designs us in a lot of ways. And that's not just the outside world, but that's our inner states too, and how we think about things and how we phrase things and how we relate to each other is certainly shaped by that. And this will be no different. I think, the danger comes in, as in most of the danger with these personal data powered things, is that it has to be grounded in informed consent, just as you would have with a personal relationship, say. And I think we should stop really thinking about experiences and start thinking about relationship as a broader model. But we have to have consent, and then we have to make sure we have to make sure that it's trained on a diverse set of data that keeps growing and, counters bias when it's detected and all of those things. And, then I think we have to be careful that we don't compress our emotion into these 5 or 7 categories, because while there, is a fair amount of agreement that there are some universal physical expressions in a social context of emotion, there's still a lot that's not really known. And so the technology can help us to get there, or it can guide us toward a preordained conclusion. And I think we want the former and not the latter.
So moral and ethics aside, just briefly, I want to tie in on it. Where are we at with, do you know where we're at with the tech? Like how, what can the AI right currently today, what can it do?
It's not that great. It's getting better at
That's
a very fast rate. And there's certain companies that are definitely leaders, like Affectiva in facial coding and beyond verbal and voice. And I think what they're learning too is that it needs to be multimodal, right? Just like we would have a hard time detecting emotion just from somebody's face. We need more signals. We do better if we have face and tone of voice, or face and gaze or gesture. And certainly the more context we have about the situation, about the person, helps us to determine emotion. And so I think right now there's, they're getting to the point where the singular technology is getting good, and that they are being, like in the case of, say, Kairos or Affectiva, they are being really careful to train on diverse data sets. And they're moving toward this kind of multimodal thing where they'll detect face and voice together, perhaps. But the context piece is still huge. And so that has a way to go. And of course, it's only limited to detecting a few emotions right now. And so that can throw people off. And of course, as you know, like then there's just lots of kludgy things. Like somebody shared an example the other day of the text sentiment analysis and ran it through like Google and Microsoft and IBM and all their different solutions. And the sentence was, there's a great white shark eating my leg. And of course, the sentiment came up positive on all of them because it, or showed happiness or joy or whatever emotions that they used because of the word great in it. And so I think, there's still quite a ways to go, but it's a huge market. It basically is going to be found in every place where we have emotions, which is everywhere. Right now, that seems to be focused on health and automotive safety and health, which I think are sort of, I would say, worthy and safe places, or somewhat safe places to get started. The other big place that it's being used a lot is, of course, marketing and advertising.
Yeah, I got one more quick question, and Susan, I'll let you jump free. So, if it's you said it could once it's able to do multimodal, I imagine it would be vastly improved. I mean, certainly, humans themselves, unless you're very very familiar with the culture and kind of the nuances and how how people talk, I imagine if you only were able to hear, someone. Just their voice, you would probably know what they were feeling, but it certainly if you could see their face, obviously the range of what you can identify would be greatly increased. But you said it can only do a few emotions. Which emotions can it really do? What are the easy ones, and then what are some of the more elusive, or like I don't even know how are they categorizing
Well,
the emotions?
yeah, that's a super contentious thing right now, because every few weeks, if you're following this, a new set of academic researchers will come out and say there's 4, there's 27, there's 5, but where it's all coming from as far as being embedded in emotion AI is from Paul Ekman's work in the 1960s, where he he did research across a few different cultures by showing people pictures and saying, hey, what do you think this person is feeling? And came up with initially 5 and then switched to 7 emotions: sadness, anger, disgust, happiness or joy. And I know I'm missing one in there, but there's just a few basics. And what's happened is then he took that information and created a facial coding system, which tracks to, this raise of the eyebrow and this lift of the cheek equals this expression of emotion. And so that's been used in, um, you know, uh, the CIA, and it's been used. You'll see it on, there was a popular show for a while with Tim Roth called Lie to Me. And it's made its way, and people were trained in the spatial action coding system. And what's made that the basis for a lot of this is, well, first of all, you've got, 5 or a little more than 5 categories, but you also have an equation of the face that can be translated into code. And so that's really taken hold, even though that in the community of researchers, and now it's gone beyond like psychology and sociology to also history and even people in economics looking at emotion. And you know there's some there are other theories about emotion that are based in our words and our social layers and cultural layers too, but they're not as easy to encode in the software. And so that's kind of what we have right now.
So, Guthrie, I don't know if you remember this or not, but I do talk about Ekman in some of my books. So
yeah,
I just pulled one off the shelf. So the 7 are
and it's like the,
joy.
oh, go ahead.
Joy, sadness, anger, contempt, surprise, disgust, and fear are the 7 that Ekman talks about. So, yeah, it's funny, Pamela, I was watching one of your videos of one of your talks before we got on to do the interview, and I was just struck by I don't remember exactly which talk this was, but you came on the stage. It was on like in the round theater in the round. It looked like huge audience, and you come on the stage and just right off the bat you start talking about what you feel when you're using Instagram or something. You asked the audience, and it was so interesting because I saw the camera kind of panned, and it looked like they were like, I mean, I don't like stereotyping people, but I'm going to. It looked like there were a lot of engineering type guys sitting with their arms crossed, looking like I don't want it. What are we talking about? Emotions.
I know.
And technology.
It's really interesting because, and I think that's why we are where we're at with the field in a way, right? Because we have emotional design, right? And that's been, Don Norman's book was enormously influential. And then came Aaron Walter's book that sort of distilled that into, these 3 levels of useful, usable, and delightful. And so we have this. So when we talk about emotional design now, it's really odd because we talk about one emotion, which is delight. And it's like very intense, very fleeting, and very rare. And what I saw in my own research, because when I got interested in this a few years ago, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to do tons of interviews and diaries and try to figure some of this out. And so what I found is that the things that designers think are delightful are often just completely missed by people. And it misses all the emotional context that people are having, their emotional repertoire, their building their capacity, coping strategies, engagement with emotion. There's just so much there. And so and then we have, that's our really narrow field of emotional design where it's at right now. And then we have this other thread that we see in everything in technology. And it might be those engineers with their arms crossed, because it's this idea of calm and this idea of like neutral technology that just stays out of the way. And so we've ended up with these 2 emotional extremes, kind of like emotion neutral almost, and delight. And I just think to myself, if I met a person like that, it was not a person I'd want to hang out with at all. And I feel like where we need to go with technology that's, ubiquitous, that's um, that's everywhere, that's gone into sort of every possible nook and cranny of our lives, functional but also deeply personal and social, is that we need to start to get a little bit more comfortable with that. And I think it's funny because people don't want to talk about emotion, and so in a lot of my research we do it indirectly, or we work ourselves up to it by building emotion concepts. So it is really tricky to do because people don't want to talk about it. You don't want to reveal it. And when we do reveal it in a social context, we're performing in a certain way. And I guess you could say too, that's a limitation of a lot of this technology that's coming along, because it's going to measure our social performance, our physical expression of social performance of emotion. So that's cool. That's like a good thing. That's a big part of emotion, but it's certainly not the whole story. So it is funny that you mentioned that, because it does come up.
I wonder about how to phrase this. How smart is it, or how possible is it to start to really integrate technology with emotion when we really, as a species, can't really don't really understand emotion. I mean, like the typical psychology research, right? Where I'm trying to remember the researcher who did this. I can't remember. It's been done by many people. You take one of those suspension bridges, that people walk across, that are a little scary. And you have people, you catch people as they either walk partway across it or just have gotten to the other side. And so they are in a state of physical arousal from excitement and fear, right? So their heart rate is going, and, because they were looking down and it was scary to cross one of those. But then you intervene and have like a young person of the attractive person of the opposite sex, interview them and with a clipboard and ask them some questions, and the research shows that later on, the person who crossed the suspension bridge will say that they were attracted to that they felt a feeling of like, emotional or sexual attraction towards that person. And the theory is, and the research shows, that because they were in what we would call in psychology a high state of arousal, not sexual arousal,
Right.
just arousal,
Right.
that people ascribe that to different things, so it's like, oh,
Absolutely.
well, I saw this attractive person and I feel this, my heart rate is and so, it's just this, I must be attracted to them, when actually, no, you're afraid of falling off the bridge. But, you apply that general feeling of arousal to, I'm sexually attracted to this person. So we are not very good.
No, we aren't.
At understanding, at talking about, at being consciously aware of, emotions and what they mean and what our states are. And, I don't know, you maybe can tell us, Pamela, whether there's still a question about, this was like, I think this is a philosophical question going back hundreds of years. Do you have the emotional reaction first, and then put I'm sorry, do you have the physical reaction first and then put an emotional name on it? Or do you have, the feeling and then you have the physical reaction? I mean, there's just...
that's still up for grabs.
It's still up for grabs.
There's still theories about that.
If all this is up for grabs, how can we possibly be talking about building it into technology?
Yeah. but we're doing it anyway, and it's going to happen anyway.
Yeah, I'm one of the people. I'm feeling fear right now, Pamela. Feeling
See,
fear.
I kind of think that, well, I mean, one thing that motivates me to get out there and talking about it is these couple of things. We don't know that much about it. We don't like to talk about it. We don't like to think about it. We're kind of in denial that we even have emotions about technology, or that technology affects our emotions, or at least we want to suppress it, So we've got all these things, yet here are these companies getting, billions of dollars of investment, making huge advances, admittedly doing really interesting things that might teach us something about our emotions, but also have the power to manipulate us, and will certainly, no matter what happens, change our emotions, because they do change over time. But it's sort of like, I don't think we can run away from it. In a sense, we've been running away from it, or been trying to make it this nice, neat model, very contained and precise. And I don't think it's any of those things. And we're probably just going to have to confront it. And it's going to be, frankly, it's going to be pretty awful for some people. But I find that the more people talk about it, that the more everyone has an interest in this. So I've been doing this really funny project, and it's just starting, and it's going on through this year. But I do a lot of speaking at different events, and they're always kind of, like networking or empty spaces. And I thought, well, what if I start doing like a pop-up event? And I'll call it a future feeling lab. And what we do is we go in and we talk about one feeling, and then try to break it down. Like, are there new nuances to it because of technology? What is it related to? Like, in a way, kind of broadening our emotional vocabularies, but in a fun way, where we're talking about like internet culture and memes and all the cool stuff that's going on today. Like, we're doing one next week on Schadenfreude. And there are so many great examples of when that's happened, and how it's related to public shaming, and all these different things. And so then you take part in these activities, and then you step back from it, and you're like, wow, technology really has had an impact on what emotion words we use, what we put in those buckets, how we express it, what direction it's going in, how social or personal are these emotions, all these different, this full range. And so people come out of it with a sense of like, wow, okay, maybe it's complicated and it's messy, but it's also really fun, and we're all kind of experts on it. And we all have thoughts about it, and that are valuable, and a lot of times haven't even been put out there yet, because we're not really talking about it that much. So I think there's a lot of potential in there. And I think with the technology too, I mean, yeah, it's easy to go all Black Mirror and be super scared about it. But then you could do the flip side too and say like, well, you know what? I'm not going to see like 10 million faces from all different cultures in my lifetime and be able to read their emotional expressions. Maybe I can learn something from that.
I think sometimes that, I don't know if this is true, but on some level, maybe we think that, having emotions and being emotional entities is one of the things that, it's like, okay, there's a defining differentiation between machines and humans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Machines don't feel. And
yeah,
humans
and
therefore we don't want to mix these, because that's like that's our line. Like we used to say machines don't think. Well, maybe they do. We used to say machines couldn't do this, but now they do.
Well, so here's I've been thinking about this a lot, Susan, because I've seen all the thought pieces out there where like, well, okay, the future of work is that robots are going to take over our jobs, but they're still going to need us for the emotional, creative
Right.
stuff. But the truth is, like we've been saying throughout this, is that we're not really that smart about emotion, and we don't really know that much. And I would say that, a good percentage of us don't have could still develop some emotional intelligence. I know I'm always learning, and I consider myself, I'm one of those people that, like I can't watch the latest hot Netflix series because I get too upset, and it's like, but even that, I think like it's not, we all can grow in that way, and we're all not experts. And so I think the machines can teach us something, but here's the analogy that I use. It's been really interesting to watch. I think we have this weird tension with animals and emotion. So I think that in a way, sometimes we resist talking about emotion because it feels too like primal, too much like animal nature. And it goes like Darwin's groundbreaking book on emotion was emotional expression in people and animals, right? And now there's all this really interesting new research and maybe it's also a change in the zeitgeist and the mindset that's saying, I think domestic animals actually do read human emotion and react to it. And we suspect that a lot of animals have emotions like pain, like Switzerland passing a law that you can't boil lobsters alive, or AI platforms to detect pain in sheep, for instance. Those are two big kind of movements that came out just in the past year. And so I think to myself that animals don't have human emotion. They have their own emotion that has a different range. It's connected with different sensory perceptions. It has different inputs. It has different, kind of forces from their species, even from, I hesitate to say their animal culture, but I feel like that's a movement that's happening too. And when I think about all that, it makes me think of AI and robots, because I think, yes, they might understand something about our human emotion. They might understand certain things better than we do, but certain things certainly will be omitted. It'll just be different. So when we think of this idea, there's always this conversation, and people always come up to me after talks and they're like, so do you think, like, when will robots have emotion? I'm like, well, they won't really have emotion. It's not like a gift that we're giving to them, like, here you go, here's the emotion, and everything now. I think they'll understand some aspects of human emotion, and then they'll probably have, a different concept of certain emotions that maybe we can learn from, maybe we'll never understand. So I don't know, maybe that all sounds a little out there, but I do think I do look at like what's happening in animal research on emotion right now and think, yeah, I think this is like a pretty good analogy that might help us not be so frightened anyway of this move.
I don't know. I'm going to be frightened for a long time. I'm going to have nightmares
didn't
about
work,
this.
did it?
No. Guthrie, do you have anything to say, Guthrie, about, ethics around this?
Yeah, sure.
Guthrie's our ethics.
I think it's safe to assume that for the most part, and it's definitely not going to be perfect, but I think it's safe to assume that shortly software will have the ability to at least know with relative certainty what emotion a human is feeling. And perhaps, and there's a chance that even better than other humans can pick up on such things.
Depends on the human and depends on the emotion, but yeah.
Right? So, okay, so we'll start with that. So there are also, I mean, to me, this almost feels like the same argument, except on a larger scale, as targeted advertising. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea of targeted advertising is that you like certain things and you like them a certain way, and we will learn about your habits and what you know what YouTube videos you watch and what you're interested in, and then we'll give you advertising on Instagram that matches your stuff. Now, sure, some may see that as an invasion of privacy. On the flip side, I don't want to watch dumb ads that aren't for me, and so some ads can be funny and some ads can be interesting. And you know what? I am in the market for like new t-shirts. So like oh, I hadn't heard about that, right? So they're like the flip side of the, well, it's, creepy and blah, 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 is that, well, it's giving you a better experience. At the end of the day, when you go on Netflix and it gives you recommended movies, yes, it's based on knowing your history and how much you watch and how much you binge and all this other stuff, this profile about you. But because it does that, it can give you a better experience through knowing more about you. And I think the same thing will happen with emotions, but on a much, much, much larger scale.
Yeah, I think that is that's a good starting point. I think, the where we're at with there's definitely going to be positives to our machines knowing a little bit about how we feel. For instance, I think of this just the other day. Well, there's lots of funny stories to tell about my daughter and Alexa, but I think one that I always think about is I was actually looking back at the recordings that of conversations with Alexa. It's an exercise that I have people do in research as well, because there's just something about like, how do you talk to bots? Like what is that like? And we even run it through like sentiment analysis and stuff like that. But I was doing it on my own family, of course. Why not? And what my youngest daughter was getting really, really mad at Alexa because Alexa wasn't understanding what she wanted to do. And I think there's a really simple example of where emotion tech might help us out, where it's like, okay, it could mitigate that situation by knowing, she's getting angry, she's getting irritated, she's getting progressively more irritated. I'm going to react in this way, or simply just say, hey, let's do this later, or apologize, or somehow respond appropriately. And I think in the best instances of emotion AI now, where it's being used, it does that. Like the automotive industry is really, really interested in this technology, and it maybe is partially for comfort, and maybe partially for excitement, like with a performance car, but the basis of it is safety. A big part of accidents are not just drunk driving or texting and driving, it's emotional driving, being angry or being sad, or being sleepy, which is something else that emotion AI usually can detect in tandem with other systems. So there's some good stuff. And then, of course, as you say, with advertising, then there's bad stuff that's like, it's invasive and it's overreaches. I think the other problem with both of them that we don't really talk about is that it puts us in kind of a time warp. So, for instance, I'm looking at something. The funny story I always tell is I was looking for a new toothbrush for my partner, and this toothbrush ads still to this day follow me around. Maybe someday I'll buy the Quip. I don't know. It looks amazing. I see ads for it, but it puts me in this time warp where I'm always that person, and I want to tell it like, hey, I'm not that toothbrush person anymore. I'm this new person. Or it's like when my other example is, I went away to graduate school, and I was reading existentialism, and I was learning languages, and I gave up my TV, and I was really adamant against that, and I did all this stuff. But then I came home for the holidays, and my parents and the rest of my family remembered the old me, the me that I didn't want to be anymore, the me that maybe I still was a little bit, but I also was this new person. And I think this is a real danger that we have with a lot of our predictive systems, is that they're always pulling us back to a fairly recent past and projecting it onto the future. And so I think that's one place that, like, kind of an unspoken danger of emotion. But I do think, like, with a lot of our other ethical conundrums, we can mitigate that in some sense by doing a better job with consent, right? There's so much talk about transparency or privacy. Since I'm thinking about relationship, not experience, I'm thinking about, like, the long term, not just this one experience you're going to have today or the experience you're going to have next week, but what's it going to be like over the years, and how are we going to evolve together? You corporation who's providing something for me and me, how are we going to co-evolve? Then what I'm thinking about is I need consent, and I need consent as I would have in all other real life, if there is such a thing anymore, real life relationships, where you're not stalking me. You're not looking up things about me that I don't want you to know. Sure, you've got some information about me. You're making some judgments about me. You have some stuff, but I have a little bit of a say in how much I reveal and when I reveal, and I get a chance to kind of review it every so often and understand it in terms that make sense to both of us. I think that's a piece that's really missing right now. And I think if we have respect for people and how they use technology, I think it's really important. And I think companies who do that are going to rise to the surface and create those kind of meaningful, long-term relationships with people.
You are much more optimistic than I am. I immediately go to the dark side. It's like, well, yeah, private. Forget that. There's not going to be privacy. I think what you say about the history and the timeline is interesting, and it is one thing to feel annoyed because someone keeps trying to sell you the toothbrush or the car.
Yeah.
It's like I just bought a car. Now I'm done. I don't plan to think about that for please 5 years till I pay this one off or something.
Yeah.
But it gets. I think that does get more. It has more meaning. So, for example, if you're depressed, like clinically depressed, right? And if some marketing company knows that,
yes,
which we would hope that wouldn't be true with privacy, but is possible.
It's already happened.
Yeah, so now you are, so now you're moving on from that, right? Mm-hmm. And yet you're still getting these messages or this marketing as though you are depressed, or the opposite, right?
Right. Yeah.
You're getting all these happy messages, and perhaps you just had an event in your life, someone pass away, and you're kind of in a grieving moment, and now you're getting all this,
right,
happy stuff.
So the emotion detection actually could help mitigate that a little bit, potentially. I mean, there's a lot of ways it could go wrong, but for instance, if it did have some sense of what you were feeling at even just a basic level, it could then then we could have systems that were a little more emotionally intelligent with us about that stuff. But it's a big ask, right? Because it's so deep and core and personal. And the fact is, what's to prevent companies from taking this one side of us, this social performance, this physical expression of emotion, and saying, yeah, that's you, that's what you're feeling, that's all your emotions, when in fact, it's quite possible I can be smiling out at say, just walking around my little town and and see a neighbor and, or somebody I know and be smiling, and inside still feel terrible and feel miserable about something. And this is the view that a lot of technology will have of us, is that kind of social view. And then you can take it to, like, if you want to take it Black Mirror level, then it will be, just as right now we're performing, say, on social media, and a lot of people feel, you know, stressed out by that kind of level of social performance that we've never had to, it's scaled up so dramatically from just our day-to-day small community where we have to do that kind of thing, that we could end up developing new strategies, techniques, forms of emotional communication for the machines so that they understand us in a certain way. That's probably actually not that unlikely to happen anyway, because we already do it.
So, do you want to know the killer app?
No, I don't. But
I
go
do.
ahead. I'm afraid to hear it.
Okay, so here it goes. So you have your little smartwatch on your phone, on your device. Oh my God, on your device. Your wrist. Your wrist is the device that the smartwatch is on.
The device called your wrist.
The device called your wrist. And okay, so it, you have your significant other, and it knows that person's emotional profile.
Yeah.
And so you guys are just making dinner, and you just get a little buzz, and you look down and it says, "This person is annoyed with you." Like you should, here are your suggested strategies that have worked in the past to
shut up, be quiet. Your partner's getting annoyed. Stop talking.
I think if both partners consent, and then as you go along, you have a chance to change your mind and adjust what it is you share and what you don't share, I think that could be great. Now, that's two adults. Imagine if it's a parent and kids.
Sure, that'll happen with kids. Yeah.
Yeah, but then that gets a little murkier, right? From an ethical standpoint.
Oh, it's going to be murky.
Well, it's all murky, but this gets even murkier because it's not two adults consenting, of course, with a corporate layer between them. I mean, that's what's missing, right, in our emotional lives right now, is like we can have emotions with each other and we can get more emotionally intelligent and be able to sense when we need to shut up or when we're being annoying or whatever. But we don't have like a corporate layer in between it mediating that conversation. So that's different, but they're still both consenting. But imagine, like I sometimes do, because I have 3 daughters and one's little and 2 are, teenagers. And so imagine I would know, like, as the bus is pulling up, what the mood is of my teenager. And mostly I know, but but imagine if I had that. She's still a kid though. Like, who does she get consent, and is that really fair? And can I ask too invasive? I don't think I would do it, So but I don't know. I think a lot of people would.
So you said that the 2 adults, like both adults, should consent, but in what, like, if you're a company, why would you need the consent of, I don't
well, right. It goes against how most companies are arranged.
Like Alexa.
Right?
Alexa hears everyone in the room.
Oh, yeah.
And makes a profile for everyone. It doesn't ask you.
No, it doesn't ask you. And the state that we're at right now is that you have to, if you want to use something, you have to agree to a monumental terms and conditions. Mm-hmm. And you don't understand it. It's miles long. You're never going to read it. And if you don't consent, you have no other option but not to use it. And you are not shown when things change or different access to your data or different, levels, or you're not shown what kind of impact it has. But those are all potential possibilities. I mean, I think as a consumer, I would choose if I had a choice, and in a lot of cases we don't, because we only have like one choice in certain areas, right? But if I had a choice between a company that was trying to make that understandable and make it like, hey, we're in this together and we want you to understand because we don't want to be involved in this, and we're only in this because we're providing value to you, and value that's going to get, even more meaningful for you over time. But if I could choose some company like that versus one who's like, yeah, just agree to this terms and conditions, you don't know what it is really, you don't know how it's going to change, like I wouldn't choose that one. And I think a lot of other people feel the same way. Right now we don't have those choices, so we don't know. And certainly there's a lot of other factors to consider in a model like that, right? Like maybe it would cost a lot more to have this consent or this level of respect built into an app. I don't think it should, but I could imagine that would be a business model that somebody would propose. Well, is that really fair? Because then you have kind of an underclass of people who are, having kind of just being mined for their data, and then you have other people who can afford not to be, and that's not really a model that I'd like to see. So it's really, really complicated, and none of this works very well with what we have in place right now. And so there's got to be levels of, I think all these ethics conversations we're having in the field right now are enormously important, even if they're frustrating and even if it feels like we're not getting anywhere. I think
we're having them with the wrong people.
Well, that too. I feel like we have to continue to do that. But I think there are other layers too. I mean, I think we have to acknowledge our personal behavior, our personal emotions, and get more comfortable with those kinds of acknowledgments and conversations. And then I think there's simply like a business model and regulatory layer that's going to have to come in if that kind of future, if we want that to become possible, because I don't think it's really, it would be something that would be a selling point to some consumers, but there's not much of an incentive for companies to go there at this point. And so
I have a second killer app.
Okay, second
killer app requires no consent from anyone.
Okay. What's this?
All right, you guys ready?
Yeah.
So here it goes.
All right.
The customer are...
I'm not hearing anything.
Me either.
Well, okay. So the
was that it?
No. The customer are employers, and they monitor all of their employees, which they do already without their consent, and they track everything they do on their computers.
Yeah.
And so all you do is you know the emotional content of all of your employees at all times. And a lot of companies every year they fire sales floors. They fire the 10% lowest performing people. And so all you do is every year you just fire the lowest 10% of the of people who are emotionally satisfied at your company.
Yeah.
And so
that's not a far off future either.
And you don't need consent, and people would buy it.
Yeah. That already exists to some degree. I mean, there are definitely companies in the HR world that are measuring emotion and employee satisfaction without emotion AI, like Culture Amp. But there's also a whole new group of companies, and I know a few of the emotion AI companies have announced partnerships with HR companies to do just that. And of course, we've all heard the stories too of the Chinese companies that make the employees wear the hats to capture their brainwaves and all that, but and we were like, oh yeah, that's crazy. But that is actually coming. And I think that's the kind of ethical concern that one's trickier, right? Because it's like you're an employee. How much say do you have about that stuff, and how much choice do you have really? I mean, you can choose not to work at a place like that, but then if it becomes widespread, that might be difficult.
What
And of
about at an
course,
airport?
yeah, public spaces,
Public
cities.
spaces.
Yeah,
This
that's
person means trouble.
Yeah, I
You intercept
definitely
him.
I thought of that one
yeah,
early in this conversation,
Yep.
right?
yeah,
We're scanning for people who look like
The
they're
thought
angry
police.
yeah.
and they're gonna
There's a
start
company called
shooting.
Human that, ironically, that does that. Kind of predictive policing based on emotion, and they're based in the UK, and they're already started on that. And then there are other cities that are monitoring emotion in like a little less high tech ways, like Dubai does that, where everywhere you go you can rate your happiness level and citizens are encouraged to. And then the intent there is a positive one, as near as I can tell, where it's like, okay, what are the things that are really boosting people up, contributing to
And
well-being,
there's
like parks and things like that. So,
there's some city that has done that in the past, and then there's like some colored light on a building, and they have you heard of
yeah,
this?
yeah. Well,
And they
that's
show you like, oh, everybody's feeling pretty good, pretty happy today. The color is, whatever the happy color is,
yeah.
blue or something. Or, oh, seem to be frustrated today. The color today seems to be yellow or orange. I do one other thing that, Guthrie, you know me, I can go to the dark side really fast. Although I got to say, Guthrie, you're doing a good job going to the dark side with these killer app ideas.
It's not
But
dark. It's just different.
it's dark. So one of the things I also am concerned about is the you if we talk about not just detecting emotion, but manipulating emotion, getting people to feel a certain thing, and then just getting like emotional fatigue. We the conversation about dopamine fatigue, right? About the fact that with all the alerts and notifications and
Sure.
buzzing and that goes on with our devices, that uh, you're automatically reacting to all the visual and auditory cues and haptic cues, and I can imagine that if you're being, I mean, and we feel this already just with advertising and media and things that you're watching, and you feel emotionally pulled, right? They're trying to pull you in to feel sorry for something or to feel upset about something. And I can just imagine that this, the smarter we get with this, the easier it is to capture our emotional attention and direct our emotional attention. And I think that could have health effects. I mean, if
Oh, yeah,
you're angry all the
absolutely.
time or sad all the time or reacting all the time, that's takes
I
a
think
toll on the
it
body.
already takes a toll on people.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is the the undercurrent, the emotional undercurrent that we don't really talk about directly right now, even as it is, where we are very comfortable talking about, different, like, social media hijacking our attention, or different apps requiring too much attention from us, or even, I think we're getting a little more comfortable with idea of emotional labor, and that's surfacing on social media for certain communities. But uh, I think that's what's really behind all of this, and all of this fatigue that we have with a lot of the technologies in our life, is that it demands too much of our emotions, that we're in
Mhm.
this kind of continual state of having to perform or simply feel things. And in a way, a lot of our emotions are being pushed to the extremes, right? And I think that could get much worse if we compress our emotions into just a few categories, because then there'll be this pull for us to be like, but I really mean this, and so
Mhm.
we'll get even more kind of pulled to the edges of that. And so that is a real a real danger, but it's already happening, and we don't
Well,
really acknowledge it that much.
This is why. This is probably why it's a good thing that when I'm not working, I teach mindfulness meditation classes. So this means that I'll have a great market moving forward for the mindfulness, because everyone will need to stop. They'll not want to be reacting so much.
Well,
Pamela, this has been so great. I mean, I thank you for being willing to talk about the dark side with me, because that always makes me happy. No, wait, there's something wrong there. No, I mean, and probably the three of us could just go on and on for a long time. So we may have to have you back on. Tell us, if someone wants to get hold of you, if they want to bring you in to give a talk or anything like that, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, the best way to reach me is at Pam in the Lab on Twitter. I also have a book coming out in just a couple months with O'Reilly called Emotionally Intelligent Design. And I'd love, yeah.
Emotionally Intelligent Design with O'Reilly. Is that available for pre-order yet?
I believe it is.
Okay. All right. That sounds like something that's going to go on my buy book list order.
Hooray.
And yeah, we'll check back in after the book comes out and see how people are reacting to it emotionally.
Yes.
And
wouldn't that be something?
when Guthrie develops one of these killer apps, we'll have you review it. How's that sound?
Okay, that sounds perfect. Thanks so much, both
Thank
of you.
you.
It's been a lot of fun.
Bye-bye.
Bye.